Mark from the States, Mark from the States, it's Mark from the United States.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Mark from the States. How are we doing today? I'm doing fantastic. I hope you are as well. Thank you so much for coming. Today I'm excited. We get to watch a new channel today. Battle Guides is the name of the channel, and they have given us their blessing to be able to watch and learn. Today we're going to learn about the Amiens, I always have a hard time pronouncing it, Amiens raid, Operation Jericho. We've done a video on this, gosh, I guess it's over a year ago, and I don't really remember too much about it. I know the basis. It's a prison in France. They flew over. We're going to bomb holes in the wall to escape. I don't know who was in the prison, though. I don't remember. So I'm looking forward to this. I've seen a few of his videos already. I watched a couple others, and they're so good. The channel name is Battle Guides. Please, the link is going to be in the description. I encourage you, I implore you, I'm willing you to go to their channel. If you have not seen his channel or any of the videos, trust me, you'll enjoy them. They're very good. So please do that. Today we're going to look at this video. I'm excited to show it to you. I'm excited to see it for the first time. So come sit with me on this big fake couch and let's check out Operation Jericho.
On a snow-shrouded winter morning in February 1944, 18 de Havilland Mosquitoes raced wingtip to wingtip at wave-top height across the English Channel. Their objective was a pinpoint strike to breach the walls of Amiens prison in occupied France and free resistance fighters held there under sentence of death. What followed was one of the most incredible aerial missions of the entire Second World War, and all caught on camera in real time. In this video, we'll combine the latest technology, veteran accounts, and that unique wartime footage to share the story of the Amiens prison raid. By February 1944, the Second World War was in a key period of change. In the east, the Germans were on the defensive, though still in some strength, and in the west, the Allies were engaged in bitter fighting around Monte Cassino. But for the bulk of the population of Western Europe, occupation was still the order of the day. That didn't mean that those occupiers were out of reach, or that the Western Allies still couldn't strike meaningful blows deep into the Third Reich. Foremost amongst those forces employed by the Allies in early 1944 were the aircraft and air crews of the Royal Air Force. Highly experienced by now, they had led bombing raids against key targets for years, and occasionally, when required, had led far more intricate, high-speed, low-level strikes against specific targets, and often for a very specific purpose. In February of that year, the medieval city of Amiens, some 75 miles from Paris, would play host to one of the most daring raids of the entire Second World War. The whole region of northern France was of particular interest to Allied planners at this stage of the war. Not only was it a potential invasion site, but was also connected to a new and very real threat in the form of V-1 and V-2 rockets, which would before long be hammering Allied cities on an hourly basis. These combined factors meant that the eyes and ears of the French resistance on the ground were absolutely vital. The resistance set up in France at the time was rather confusing. A number of organizations existed, each with different names, goals and structures, and often opposing political aims. They engaged in activities such as intelligence gathering, sabotage, and assisting escaped prisoners with varying success.
Yeah, that's something I never really even thought about. The different factions of the resistance. I just kind of grouped they all were one, you know. But it's interesting to now learn that there's different, and it makes sense. I mean, this wasn't some big, national organization or anything. That they're all just in different regions and areas, and people who have different political beliefs. That's pretty. God, that must be difficult to have to work with all these different people and different groups. But very interesting. I'm glad he point that out. That's something I did not know. Absolutely.
But with invasion planning proceeding apace, it was at least agreed upon that the resistance would be needed soon to sow as much disruption as possible. Combating the ever-emboldened French resistance were a number of specialist German units, including the Gestapo and the secretive Abwehr. Tasked with capturing resistors and dismantling networks, they'd been fighting their own war within France since 1940. Over the previous year, hundreds of suspected resistance members have been captured, including, whether known to the Germans or not, some serious players in the French resistance networks. With vital knowledge of local setups, the longer they were imprisoned, the higher the chance of them giving away vital information under interrogation. Many were held here in Amiens prison. So let's take a look at the prison. Still in use to this day, it's obscured on modern satellite imagery, but by superimposing aerial imagery of that time, we can explore the site in detail. Built in 1904 on the outskirts of the city, originally to hold criminals guilty of crimes ranging from burglary and theft right up to capital offences such as murder, it was a highly secure complex. Reconnaissance photographs of the jail show that the main prison building was in a cruciform shape, with the north-south wing being some 400 feet long and the east-west wings covering 650 feet. The building was 62 feet tall at the roof ridge, and the entire complex was enclosed by a wall 11 feet high, believed, erroneously as it happens, to be 3 feet thick. Inside were fenced courtyards to segregate prisoners while exercising. Resistance reports put the German guards' quarters on the short sides of the cruciform, the guards' mess at one end and the guard room at the other. We should make the point here that whilst the popular image of Amiens prison is one swarming with SS guards, it was in fact staffed mostly by local French officials, though of course there was also a sizable German presence on the site. The internal prison count on the 18th of February was 832 male and female criminals, political prisoners and members of the resistance held in different wings, including 180 or so held in the German administered section. Further intelligence reported that the guards had their lunch at noon and that many of the prisoners had their midday meal at the same time in the central hall of the prison. There's little doubt that in early 1944, German intelligence services and milice collaborators had achieved real success locally. A number of agents linked to MI6, MI9 and the Special Operations Executive had been captured and some were imprisoned in Amiens. Just how much the Germans knew about who they held was unclear. Local resistance leader Dominique Ponchadier, perhaps the key instigator of the raid, who regularly returned to Britain, had managed in late 1943 to propose Amiens prison as a target for the new and largely untested Mosquito force at the RAF's disposal. In conversation with his London connections, including the raid's eventual leader, he suggested freeing those prisoners in Amiens held by the Germans as terrorists who could only expect execution. His hopes meshed well with Air Vice Marshal Sir Basil Embry's desire to employ his new force in low-level precision raids. As a result, MI6 approached Air Marshal Trafford Lee Mallory, requesting preparation of a plan to attack a certain important target in France. Here's Basil Embry, commanding No. 2 Group RAF, whose airmen would conduct the mission.
Early in February 1944, I was asked if I thought our Mosquitoes were capable of carrying out an operation to release about 700 French resistance movement patriots awaiting trial and death in Amiens prison. I said I thought it would be possible, but I would want to examine the full implications of such an operation before giving a definite answer. Later I told him I thought it could be successful, but that it would be with the loss of some of the prisoners' lives.
And so, it was agreed that a strike would be conducted on Amiens prison to free those resistors held there. The man chosen to lead the raid was already something of a legend within the wartime Royal Air Force. 28 years old and the holder of no less than 3 Distinguished Service Orders and the Distinguished Flying Cross. Group Captain Percy Charles Pickard, known as Pick to his men, had joined the RAF in 1937 and risen to fame in 1941 as the star of the Oscar-winning documentary Target for Tonight. Having completed an incredible 100 wartime sorties on both bombing raids and special operations duties, he certainly had the required credentials. Though notably, he was less experienced at low-level daytime raids, having completed only 5 or 6 missions in that role. The task of raiding Amiens prison was given to Pickard's 140 wing, based here at RAF Hunsdon in Hertfordshire. Comprising numbers 464 Australian, 487 New Zealand and 21 squadrons, they were each armed with the Mark 6 fighter bomber variant of the iconic de Havilland Mosquito. A total of 18 aircraft will conduct the bombing raid, 6 from each squadron. So let's take a closer look at this incredible aircraft. First conceptualized as a high-speed bomber and tested in the early part of the Second World War, it met the needs of the RAF very well. This Mark VI variant, one of 3 on display at the excellent de Havilland Aircraft Museum in Hatfield, England, was of the exact type that Pickard and his airmen would use for the raid. Unusually constructed of lightweight wood, it significantly reduced the burden on the aircraft industry at a time when resources were in short supply. Weighing very little and powered by 2 supercharged Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, those famously used in the Spitfire, it was unsurprisingly very fast, reaching a top speed of around 380 miles an hour, which was unheard of for a bomber at the time. It could also carry a significant bomb load, which in later variants could equal that of the B-17 Flying Fortress. With a crew of just 2 and armed with 4 20mm cannon and 4 303 machine guns, it also packed a punch in the air. And so, on the 18th of February 1944, the crew was of 18 Mosquitoes plus an additional adaptive Mozzie Mark IV of the film production unit, piloted by Flight Lieutenant Tony Wickham, which would film the raid, entered the briefing room at RAF Hunsdon to hear the final details. The plan had already been formulated by Sir Basil Embry, who had hoped to lead the raid but been refused due to his senior rank. It was something like this. Each aircraft carrying 4 500-pound bombs set on an 11-second delay were to head to France in 3 groups, each containing 2 waves of 3 aircraft. Flying northwest round London to a rendezvous over the town of Littlehampton, where they would meet their fighter escort of 4 squadrons of Hawker Typhoons. Crossing the channel at a height of only 100 feet, they would head inland to the French village of Senapon, where they would turn northeast, passing Bourdon and Guégencourt, before swinging southeast to the village of Bouzencourt on the Somme. Here they would pick up the old Roman road at the town of Albert, which ran in a straight line directly to Amiens and the prison on its eastern outskirts. The prison is...
It's pretty wild to think the path that they have to take to get there. You know, landmarks needing to be followed, so on and so forth, and to be able to line up, and then having to do it all together, and just, I mean, I don't realize, you watch these, like Masters of the Air is on right now, and watch the first 2 episodes, and I love it, by the way. I think it's very entertaining. It's just the fact of how they're able to navigate with, at the time it wasn't, but primitive equipment, and how they're able, it's pretty remarkable that they're able to do all that. And I mean, doing it in a B-17 is one thing. It's pretty slow. But here you're going, over 300 miles an hour trying to... it seems like there's a lot of math involved, which, so, I mean, these aren't unintelligent people flying these aircraft. They've got to be able to make calculations. They've got to be able to, be able to process visual information, written information, just so much, to fly these missions. It's not just getting a plane and go, It's pretty remarkable. And just seeing the path that they take, just from taking off, the circling around, then they're all together crossing the channel, hitting all these spots. Yeah. It's pretty crazy.
Itself had been modelled back at Hunsdon in late 1943, and the crews each had a chance to familiarise themselves with its location before takeoff. A coin toss in the briefing determined that 487 Squadron, the New Zealanders, would lead the first attack. Their role was to target the eastern outer wall of the perimeter at a speed of 240 miles per hour and a height of 50 feet. The second wave of 487, having watched this attack from a higher altitude, would follow up moments later in a north-south run to attack the northern wall of the complex. The real challenge was to hit the walls hard enough to destroy them whilst avoiding the prisoners just a few yards away. Ultimate precision was needed.
Yeah.
The second group, number 464 Squadron, the Australians, were to attack 3 minutes after the first, also in 2 waves. Their targets were in the southeastern and the northwestern ends of the main building respectively, with the second wave also targeting the guards' quarters from a height of 100 feet. The intention being that the concussion of the bombs would spring the locks and hinges of the cells housing the prisoners. Finally, in Group 3, the 6 aircraft of 21 Squadron were to attack 10 minutes later. This was a reserve. Approaching in 2 waves from the east and north, they would release their bombs only if required. In the period between attacks 2 and 3, the film unit Mosquito would overfly the prison to assess the damage and decide if the third attack was required. Ultimately, though, the call about this final wave would be made by Pickard himself.
Oh, wow.
In the briefing, Pickard also issued the instructions that a stop-go code for the mission of red, red, red or green, green, green heard over the radio could call off or progress the attacks at any time. In order to control the operation, Pickard placed himself and his equally experienced navigator Jim Broadley at the rear of the second wave, orbiting the target for a total of 10 minutes at much increased risk to himself. Pickard's closing words summed up the feelings of all involved.
Well, boys, this is a death or glory show. If it succeeds, it will be one of the most worthwhile jobs of the war. If you never do anything else, you can still count this as the finest job you could ever have done.
And so, at 10:50 a.m. on the 18th of February 1944, the first Mosquitoes taxied out onto a bitterly cold runway at RAF Hunsdon, with each aircraft powering down the runway in their allocated waves. Here's Pilot Officer Max Sparks of 487 Squadron.
The aircraft took off quickly, one after another, at about 11 in the morning. We were going to hit the jail when the guards were at lunch. By the time I got to 100 feet, I couldn't see a thing except that grey, soupy mist and snow, also the rain beating against the perspex window.
Oh, geez.
There was no hope of either getting into formation or staying in it, and I headed straight for the Channel coast.
As Sparks said, very soon they were en route to target. There was immediately, though, an issue. The Typhoon squadrons had only been briefed minutes before takeoff, and several aircraft missed the rendezvous. Things were so confused that 198 Squadron's leader, the only man to know the destination, simply said to his men 5 minutes before takeoff, "There's a job on, chaps. Escort mozzies, follow me."
Ugh.
This last-minute confusion and the poor weather had a major impact almost immediately.
Yeah.
2 Mosquitoes of both the second and third waves lost contact in the snow clouds and had to return to base, as did 6 of the Typhoons. The remaining 14 Mozzies pushed on and finally over the channel met better weather. Maintaining radio silence and skimming at wave-top height at more than 380 miles an hour, they approached the enemy coast, with Tony Wickham's film Mozzie capturing the journey in this remarkable footage, which required nerves of steel and lightning-fast reactions. There was no going back. As the formations crossed to France, they began their final checks for the run onto the target. As the main formations began their series of turns in towards the target, Flight Lieutenant Hannekin's Mozzie developed an engine fire, which meant he had to turn for home. Being hit by flak en route and paralysed in his right side, he incredibly still managed to land safely at Ford in Sussex. The remainder pushed on, reaching that straight Roman road running from Albert to Amiens. At exactly 12 o'clock, the first wave of Group 1, easing back their twin throttles to slow the aircraft to 240 miles per hour, were running down this very road at treetop height with a total of 12 bombs destined for the prison's eastern wall. Here's Pilot Officer Sparks of 487 Squadron once again.
3 of us were flying so low that I had to keep my aircraft tilted at an angle to avoid hitting the tops of the trees with my wing. It was then, as I flew with one eye on those poplars and the other watching the road ahead, that I was reminded we had a fighter escort. A Typhoon came belting across right in front of us, and I nearly jumped out of my seat. The poplars suddenly petered out, and there, a mile ahead, was the prison. It looked just like the briefing model, and we were almost on top of it within a few seconds. We hugged the ground as low as we could, and at the lowest possible speed, we pitched our bombs towards the base of the wall, fairly scraped over it, and our part of the job was over.
Despite the successful run-in, it seems that the bombs of these leading aircraft passed straight through the eastern wall, exploding on the far side of the complex or in the fields beyond, all except one of Wing Commander Smith's, which breached the southern wall. Moments later, the 2 remaining aircraft of the second wave of Group 1 were running in from the north, with one of Pilot Officer Darrell's bombs blowing a neat hole in the north wall, a second striking the roof of the main building, and a third hitting the northern side of the eastern building. With the prison now wreathed in smoke and brick dust, the second group attacked in their 2 waves. Running in at just 50 feet, the first wave again attacked the intact eastern wall and the guards' mess room.
That was real footage, right?
The first wave again attacked the intact eastern wall and the guards' mess room, with the bomb landing directly on the latter, destroying it and its occupants. The second wave of Group 2, attacking from the northwest, followed on with another 8 bombs, registering hits on the northwest corner of the prison wall and the main transept of the prison building. In total, 23 bombs had fallen in the prison compound in a little over 5 minutes, with 6 failing to explode. A further 17 had gone through the much thinner than expected prison walls and detonated outside the compound. Some of those, travelling a considerable distance after striking the frozen ground, had caused damage in Amiens itself, including one which killed 40-year-old Madame Letienne in her kitchen. Above the action, as the waves moved in, was Tony Wickham in the film Mosquito, making 3 passes over the target between 12:03 and 12:11 at a height of 500 feet. He could inspect the damage. Here's what he recalled.
We could see the first time we flew over the objective that the operation had been a complete success. Both ends of the prison had been completely demolished and the surrounding wall broken in many places. We could see a large number of prisoners escaping along the road.
By slowing this footage down, we too can explore the scene a little better. Clearly visible is the Albert to Amiens road, running left-right, which the first wave used to guide their approach. The breach in the north wall is closest to us, and we can also see damage to the main building's northern end and the German mess block and guard room. Despite reports from the crews, no men can be seen running through the northern breach, but given the smoke and dust rising, that's not particularly surprising. Now let's turn to one of those on the ground, Raymond Vivant, a leader in the OCM resistance network, who recalled what happened.
I thought initially that a German plane had just crashed close to us, and I began to delight in this when a succession of explosions resounded. I saw the wall on the left split open abruptly, and a cloud of dust invaded my cell. But as soon as it dissipated, I saw that the door was torn from its hinges. The long corridor which served my part of the prison had been replaced with a cluster of smoking debris. I saw the countryside covered with snow, extending to infinity. A large breach had been opened in the high surrounding wall.
In total, there were at least 4 breaches and many escaping prisoners, black figures against the snow-covered fields.
Wow.
Realising the job was complete and Group 3 were not required, Wickham and the others listened for Picard's call. Silence. Daring not to wait any longer, Wickham himself called "Red, Red, Red" across the radio. But where was Picard? Just a few miles away from Amiens prison was this airfield at Glisy, which at the time of the raid was a Luftwaffe fighter base, home to the potent Focke-Wulf 190s of JG-26, some of which were already airborne. One such aircraft was flown by Feldwebel Wilhelm Meyer, who at 12:04 had spotted the Mozzies of Group 2 approaching the prison. Focusing on the aircraft at the rear of the formation, he began to dive down on the unsuspecting crew, which had turned away from the other Mosquitoes. Moments later, a farm labourer heard a burst of gunfire and looked up to see Picard's Mosquito rear up as its tail came away from the fuselage before slamming down into this very field, exploding on impact.
Oh, no.
Rushing to the site, several civilians managed to pull the 2 crewmen from the fire, but it was too late. Both Picard and Broadley had been killed. The time, confirmed by Picard's charred wristwatch, which had stopped on impact, was 12:05. The bodies of both Picard and Broadley were collected by locals the following day and buried a stone's throw from the prison they had lost their lives attacking. Even today, that crash site, an unremarkable farmer's field in northern France, bears the scars of that day, with parts of the downed aircraft still scattered across the ground. Despite a strict prohibition, many local residents attended the graveside to pay their final respects. One more Mosquito would fail to return that day, that of Squadron Leader McRitchie, which was hit by flak near Fresneville, with navigator Sammy Sampson being killed outright. McRitchie, despite receiving an incredible 26 separate wounds, managed to make a belly landing and spent the remainder of the war as a prisoner. 2 Typhoon pilots would also fail to return, with Canadian Joseph Renault taken prisoner and 23-year-old Henry Brown last seen entering a snowstorm over the English Channel. His body would never be found. The total cost on the ground cannot be overlooked either. Official numbers of prisoners at the time of the raid vary between 700 and 820, with around 190 being resistors. It's believed that in total 95 occupants of the jail were killed by bombs or guards' bullets as they fled the prison, and that a similar number were wounded. By the 26th of February, a total of 518 had been recaptured or never left the prison at all, meaning that somewhere in the region of 80 resistors found freedom, at least for a while, on that winter day. German losses are also hard to gauge. The raid was timed to coincide with the lunch of both prisoners and guards, and a direct hit on the mess hall for German guards, it is believed, killed around 20, including the prison's governor, and perhaps wounded as many as 70. But for those raiders on the mission, which became known to many as Operation Jericho after a 1946 film of that name, there was a feeling of mixed success. They'd done their job, and done it well, but not without loss. Importantly though, when studying this action, we should not lose sight of the fact that many of those who found freedom that day, instead of a firing squad, would in the months to come play an integral role in securing their country's freedom from Nazi Germany. Perhaps though, the best way to sum up this remarkable action and what it achieved can be found in the words of Wing Commander Irving Smith, who led the first wave on that day.
We heard the details of this mission with considerable emotion. After 4 years of war, just doing everything possible to destroy life, here we were, going to use our skill to save it. It was a grand feeling, and every pilot left the briefing room prepared to fly into the walls rather than fail to breach them.
Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. And if you'd like to
So
see
good.
more or support us in our work to share
good.
more of this kind of history, check out our Patreon at the link below. We really enjoy making content like this here on YouTube. So if there's something you'd like to see us cover in the near future, leave us a comment below. We'd just like to finish with a special thanks to Dr. Robert Lyman, author of 2 books on the raid, Jailbusters and Operation Jericho. And if you'd like to study this incredible raid in more detail, check them out at the links in the description. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. The videos he does are just so good. Very good. I hope you enjoyed that. I did. And I'd forgotten that Picard lost his life. I totally forgot that. It hit me again. And I was like, what? Oh, man, I was disappointed. Yeah, there is going to be that question of, was it worth it? Was it worth it? I mean, as a like numbers game, no, it wasn't really worth it. You lost a lot of guys, not a lot, but a few. Lost some aircraft. They're thinking on average, the estimate was about 80 got out, but you don't really know. Many of them died, the ones you were trying to free. Yeah. You just wonder, but it does have that psychological. It's kind of like, it reminds me a lot like the Doolittle raid on Japan, on Tokyo. It didn't really do anything, but the psychological thing, saying, hey, the Germans weren't expecting, any sort of raid on a prison, which they probably thought was in a good spot to where couldn't be done, but the Brits proved, along with the Aussies, and proved that they were able to do it, and yeah, that's probably the lingering question about the whole thing. Was it worth it? Yeah, interesting, great video. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Hope everybody's happy, healthy, and safe. Thanks so much for coming and hanging out with me. I appreciate all of you. Have a great day. And just before we go to Battle Guides. Go like and subscribe. Watch this video again. This time, you can, if you haven't already, you can watch it without me yapping and pausing it. But yeah, we're definitely going to do more. And so, pretty cool. All right, everyone. Take care. Bye.
Mark from the States. States. It's Mark